So they're talking on Skype.
Similar to Skype, but you can do groups. It's like teachers.
There's Claire. Claire, are you there?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't see you on the camera. Oh, there you are. Hello. Hello. How's the Midlands?
We had so much rain yesterday in one storm, it was amazing.
Really? So I don't know how many people are coming. So I can't hear your sound. Let's just do a little sound check. How's your sound, Claire? Oh, she's on mute.
Not one talking here. Start selling every single flipping fork.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was just closing off all of the windows that were open.
Okay.
Okay, are we waiting for a bit longer for other people?
Yeah, I think let's just wait like 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we can start. Let me just see. If Willem's joining. Yeah, I think so. Oh yeah, here he is. We may as well get started, hey Claire? I think Willem's arriving. I'm not sure if anyone else is. They can just come in. Oh, here's Julie. Do you want me to, Claire, give a bit of an sort of an intro? Or like...
background as to why this is happening.
Yeah. Hi, Jules.
Hi, guys.
Okay. So I'm just going to put everyone else's on mute for now. If anyone wants to speak, then you can unmute yourself. The background to this chat or mind meld with Claire is after the Rodrigo presentation that some of us heard, I realized that I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. I didn't understand really what magnetic and gravitational fields were. I didn't really understand the periodic table and how it related to the GAN's work. He was talking about pulling elements, using the fields to kind of transmute elements. I can't exactly remember which ones he said, but he mentioned something like using lead to pull mercury into gold, and there was a whole sort of alchemical thing. And so in my mind, I thought it would be really interesting to get some of Claire's insight into it, because she's got a master's in environmental and chemical engineering. And all of the work with the scientists, I can't remember his name, who spoke a lot about in his own way, the magnetic and gravitational field, some of the scientists that you've covered over the years, Claire. So I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on some of the basics in your mind, according to you, you know, what does it actually all mean? Like, even the idea of GANs and this gas in a nano solid, that's what they said in one of the teachings, the recent teachings. It's not nano state, it's gas as a nano solid. So I'm finding myself confused, and I just wondered how much insight you could bring.
Okay, I'll have myself on mute. So I said to Mandy, please send me any questions to see if I actually could help. And so I've only got Mandy's questions so far to respond to, and I am able to answer those as far as my understanding goes. And if anyone else has other perspectives to give on the answers, please let me know as well. This is a mind meld, not a one-way thing. And then yeah, if any of you others have questions, if I can't answer them, we've got a whole group and maybe we can all help answer them. I've also, the reason I said yes to this is I like to challenge myself to have to understand something to the point at which I can explain it. So I'm using this as a challenge to myself, to see if I can and to have a better understanding on this. And then the second reason I'm doing this is I think a lot of you have answers to questions as well. I also wanted to say one other thing, that they've just had the part 1 to 5 of understanding plasma over the last few Mondays that I found very useful. And that really helped me even get better understanding too. So no matter what you do, just go and watch those if you haven't had a chance to. They really are worthwhile listening to. Okay, so I think particularly Mandy's questions were just to have a basic understanding. What I understand the plasma GANs and generally what gravitational fields, interaction, nanoparticles are all about, and then understand how the periodic table relates to working with GANs. And then there's a couple of questions around CO2 GANs, and then particularly what Dr. Rodrigo was talking about was removing mercury by transmuting it to monatomic gold in the brain, but doing it using CH3 GANs, so CH3 and CO2. So I'll talk about that as well as far as I understand it. So I'm going to answer those first, and then after that we can see if anyone else has questions. Okay. I can see Tina having a little lie down there. Hope keep you awake, Tina. Okay, so I'm just going to go straight into it. As far as I know, most of us are interested in Keshe because of the various things. There's the making the GANs, there's the making the energy machines, the car units, etc., and the health units in different forms. And why I love to think about it is that we kind of in a bit of an evolution of humanity, where we're moving from a very matter-based humanity into a much more a higher resonance, higher frequency humanity, of which plasma is what we are now needing to understand, so that we can understand how we work in this next phase. And that phase has always existed, we just were unaware that it was there, most of us. And so we basically just raising our understanding of ourselves just a bit further above matter and what actually forms matter in the first place. Are these videos that I see of all you guys covering your screen, or is it only me? No, leave them there. Okay, so in general, this is an image that the Keshe group give, and they say we've always talked about how things go from a solid to a liquid to a gas, but there's even more states above that. And the states that they refer to are nano and GANs in between a plasma. And I've got this, see, I just decided to start with the I don't know what to call it, the common social consciousness understanding of what plasma was, and build on that. Common social consciousness says that plasma is either a colorless part of the blood or an ionized gas, where the positive ions have now made the electrons become free from them, or the electrons are now free of the rest of the atom, and they're able to move more freely. And the way that they do that is generally by adding heat, very high heat, to free those electrons. So they also talk about plasma used for propulsion, so in space, and that's quite an interesting thing there. But this is a really useful video, so let me just play it and I'll discuss it from there. Can you hear the sound? Yes? Okay.
You may have learned about the 3 states of matter, solid, liquid, and a gas in a previous lesson. Did you know that there is a 4th state of matter, plasma? In this lesson, we will learn about plasma. Let's start by thinking about ice. When ice is sufficiently heated, it melts to form water. It has therefore undergone a change of state, from a solid to a liquid. Recall that in a solid, all of the particles are closely packed in a fixed position, and therefore has a fixed shape and volume. The particles in a liquid are still touching one another and are able to move around each other. Therefore, a liquid still has a fixed volume, but it takes the shape of their container. What is the change of state that occurs when water is heated to 100 degrees Celsius? Pause, think, and continue when ready. The answer is water evaporates from a liquid to a gas, in our case, water vapor. The particles in a gas are further away from one another and take the shape and volume of their container. For certain substances, if we continue to apply heat to their gaseous form, another change of state could occur. These substances can go from a gas to a state of matter called plasma. For this change of state to occur, very strong heat must be applied. When heat is sufficiently strong, the electrons are stripped from their respective atoms, creating free electrons and positive ions. Although there are both negative and positive particles, plasma is neutral overall, as there are equal amounts of oppositely charged particles. Since free electrons are present, substances in plasma form can conduct electricity. This is what separates a gas from plasma. All gases cannot conduct electricity, but plasma can. Naturally occurring plasma include lightning and the northern lights. If we were to go far beyond planet Earth, stars also exist in plasma form. In fact, stars are really just hot balls of plasma. Plasma can be found in fluorescent light bulbs and neon signs. When an electrical current is passed through the mercury vapor in fluorescent light bulbs, it heats up the gases sufficiently to strip the electrons and to create plasma. Plasma screen TVs are made possible due to this state of matter. A plasma screen is made of many thousands of tiny dots called pixels, which are made of 3 fluorescent light electrodes emitting the colors red, green, and blue. The combination of these colors can give any possible color, which is why we can see all colors on these screens. The higher the number of pixels, the higher the definition, and the images will appear sharper and more detailed.
Okay, so basically I wanted to show you that because it's important to start with the existing understanding of plasma, especially if you're ever explaining it to anyone else, and then build on that, right? So they talk about the way that you create plasma is by taking something that is already a gas and then heating it up even further to free the electrons. So what I wanted to say is when we boil water, if the pressure outside the water is very high, the boiling point of water is much higher. Whereas if the pressure outside is lower, the boiling point is lower. So in a way, just by changing the external environment, you can change the temperature at which you boil water, okay? In a similar way, when we're working with GANs and the Keshe technology, we're basically changing the external environment to enable us to make a plasma at room temperature. So most of us in the normal engineering and science world think you can only make a plasma at very high temperatures. But you can, in fact, boil water at very low temperatures if the pressure is changed. And you can, in fact, also make a plasma at room temperature if you change the external environment. And the way that we change the external environment in the Keshe technology is by changing the magnetic and gravitational fields around. And the second thing that we need to be aware of is that everything is a plasma, but the things that we see as a physical matter are just very dense forms of that plasma. So by us heating something up, it's like making it lighter and lighter and freeing it up to become the plasma. But similarly, by changing the external fields, you can turn something into a plasma. Does that make sense so far? Thumbs up. Okay, so it's quite common that everybody refers to this quote, and I might as well put it in as well, that basically everything is energy, frequency, and vibration, and anything we typically talk about in, whether it's a chemical or an atom or an electron or a proton, don't think about it as a thing, just think about it as something that is in a state of vibration that's more dense or more tightly wound than something else, okay? Don't complicate it with nouns, just realize it's just frequency and vibration, just changing its state depending on its external environment. Okay. So Dr. Keshe refers to this diagram as a diagram to indicate what is a plasma. And he basically says everything is a plasma, and you have this very tight inner center and then these looser fields further out. And that if you look over here, you've got visible light and matter. This is another version of it. Visible light is here, X-rays are there, and the matter state is here. So it's just the part of the densification of this spinning field that we can actually see. Some of you might look upwards into this and see it could look a bit like a triad or a cone, but it could also be a middle of a sphere coming out to the external side of a sphere, or a spiral from above. And many different people have attempted to understand how matter comes from energy or vibration, and they've used variations on this. Dr. Keshe's one is a very simplified one, and it's very easy for anyone to actually wrap their brains around. It's just everything is a field, okay? He's also, in the kids' teachings, talked about how if you look at an egg, the part that we see as matter is like the yolk, but the rest of it is the plasma, or the other way around. The part that we see as solid is the shell, but there's all this other stuff on the inside. So that's really important to realize. Imagine you took the shell off, the solid part of the egg, you would see there would be all this other stuff that makes up the solid that you can't always see. Another thing to remind ourselves of is that we regularly refer to in science that there's this energy field out of which everything comes. And the visible spectrum part is pretty small compared to everything that's there, and the physical world is only a smaller part of that too. So just being aware that everything comes from energy is now a common accepted thought in the world of physics. And no matter what it is, whether it's a force field or a type of particle, we know that they all come from this 0-point energy field. Okay, so that's in agreement with what he says. So how do those rays coming from those 0-point energy fields, those flowing frequencies, start actually turning into something physical? Now, some people talk about superstrings, other people talk about spin and how that turns into donuts, etc. This is a video from the Keshe Foundation. It says these magnetic rays coming from the source interact, and as they interact, they form this particular shape of field, and that's a plasma. And the plasma has various levels of strength to it. The very sort of tight inner and moving all the way out. And this plasma has a pulling in part and a pushing out part. And the pulling in part is a sort of a suction, which you can say is the gravity. It's this, you can say gravity sucks, and the pushing out part is what they call the magnetic fields. And it's pretty much just fields. We just use the word maggrav because they have magnetic, which are pushing out, and gravitational, which are pulling in effects. This is another video from the Keshe Foundation. You can see the gravitational is a pulling in, and the magnetic is a pushing out. And you can see there's actually layers of them. Pushing out or repulsion, and pulling in or attraction. And it's all just the same stuff. And over the past, we've been calling them different things, and as if they are different forces, but they're actually the same sort of interacting forces. One the pulling in force and one the pushing out force. And where the pulling in and pushing out force sort of find balance is where you get the event horizon, or the barrier, or the Coulomb effect that they talk about, that they weaken and weaken until a point where you reach the balance. And that balance is what we sort of see as the physical boundary. You can imagine whatever it is, whether it's the Earth, or whether it's a star, or whether it's a black hole, whatever it is, there's going to be a part where the physical boundary is. And you could call it an atmosphere or a skin. Your apple that you eat, the physical boundary of where the magnetic and gravitational fields end is at a balanced point is the skin, but then they continue outwards. We just don't see those fields. Okay, so this is from the latest Understanding Plasma presentation. When they use the word magnetical, it's still the same interaction of fields. It's just the outward flowing fields. And when they use the word gravitational, same interacting fields, but it's inward flowing fields. Okay, so gravity within, magnetic without, and it's just a really useful way to remember them. So pulling in, pushing out, balance at those points, you have the atmosphere or the skin. And you have the principal fields, and then they weaken as they go out further. So this is another way of explaining when I said originally, you can change the temperature to develop a plasma, you can change the pressure to develop plasma, or you could simply just change the magnetic and gravitational field effects around something, and you can actually free the electrons and generate plasma as well. Okay, everyone happy so far? Like a little thumbs up. Cool. So the Keshe Foundation says that everything is in fact a plasma. It's a dynamic interaction of fields, but we only see the fields when they slow down enough to become matter. And the direction of flow of these fields dictates what we call magnetic and gravitational fields. So they say the magnetic fields flow away and the gravitational fields in, and usually under. And that any two of these, whenever you have one plasma in relation to another, they interact, and that those interacting fields then add another dimension of complexity to it. But basically they create attraction or repulsion like magnets, or gravity effects like the Earth to our own body. And every single effect that we know of can be explained by these interacting fields. And essentially it's the interaction of various fields in our galaxy, in our solar system, in our Earth, in our elements on the Earth that actually create everything that we see around us. Okay, there is nothing actually physical, anything other than a plasma. The physicality is just when they have a vibration equal to each other. And you can almost see from this picture, even the solar system, if you view it from a different perspective, looks like a plasma as well. And the interaction of fields between this point and this point is different than the interaction of fields between this point and this point. So you can have different things emerging physically than you do here, and then you do here. So what I wanted to do with this talk is always related to how current science or different unified science perspectives are looking at this, to show you that it's actually all very similar. Okay, from the Resonance Foundation, their unified physics things, they say in the case of the atom, electrons are not points in space, they are actually fields. Even the radius of the proton is described as a charged radius, because all that can be identified as a proton is a charged density in a region of space, or a field that we call a particle. So even science is now saying there is no such thing as a particle, there's just a density, or you could imagine an interaction of fields that creates that sort of physical boundary, which we then call a particle. Everything we come in contact with is an experience of these fields repelling each other, as one electron field around an atom or molecule resists merging with another field, or another one actually is attracted to another one. So basically this is now being agreed on by sciences as well. So we mustn't confuse ourselves by saying, oh, there's a proton, there's an electron, there's something there, therefore if I do anything with it I have to change those physical things. No, there's nothing but fields, and if you play with fields you are an alchemist and you can do extraordinary things. Okay, here's some other ways ways of expressing what this looks like in various different artists. Here's one of my favorite that I use all along, but it's basically the same flow form in different perspectives. Okay, this is what your heart looks like as it's moving, but it's also what the flow form of a plasma might look like if you looked at that way. If you look at it from the top, it's a yin yang, or whatever you wish to call it. But this is what I really want to draw attention to. In science, we've realized there is no such thing as anything that we can actually define as matter. The only way we define matter is something that has mass, but anything that has energy, and it has inertia. But that doesn't mean it's solid. It just means something that is spinning has inertia, like a spinning top, something that resists its change of its current flow. And so basically, there isn't even a definition of matter that there is actually anything physical. It's just that it has mass and it has inertia. In Dan Winter's description of it, which is starting to very much match both Nassim Harameyn's and Keshe's explanation of it, he says similarly, there is no such thing as anything physical. He refers to how these all relate to a flow form that is a donut that's connected to the golden ratio, which he calls phi, and he calls it a phi cycle. So there's no physical, it's just a phi cycle. But it's all the same information, just interpreted in a different way. One of my favorite images is this, that we used to study in class at school, that there's a magnet that generates a magnetic field. But we have to turn ourselves inside out and realize there's actually a magnetic field that generates the magnet. That field of interacting field effects is actually what's generating the effect of pulling in and pushing out that we then view as a solid magnet. Okay. Similarly, Nassim Harameyn says a black hole is just when you're inside those fields, when they're pulling inwards very forcefully, and a sun is when you're outside those fields where they're pushing outwards, and you see the radiation from that sun versus the suction of gravity from within. And then you can see these same images drawn in around the human body, around the earth, everywhere. It's those same field shapes over and over again. In Dan Winter's physics, he explains how the suction in effect, if it is in the golden ratio, creates such a huge suction that it actually equals the force of gravity. So therefore gravity is actually just suction in. And Nassim Harameyn has used the black hole equation to say no matter whether it's a cell, an atom, an earth, or a star, if you use the black hole equation, the forces that hold it together equal the force of gravity. There's no such thing as a strong nuclear force or any of those other forces we do. It's just another level up of gravity. So it's all very much agreeing with each other. Okay, so there's Nassim Harameyn's black hole physics. And you can just see the people in the world of sacred geometry refer to this all the time. Very similar information no matter where you look, over and over again. That form follows flow, and that the pictures, the images that we see in the physical actually are, instead of seeing them as physical things, look at the flow forms that generate them, and you'll have a much better understanding of how they were generated. Now, my favorite person who's ever explained this is a man called Walter Russell, and he always talked about there's only the pull of gravitation in and the force of radiation out. You could say the pull of gravitation in and the repulsion of magnetism out. It's the same again. And he says all of existence is formed from these. And he managed to take that information and unpack it in depth to actually figure out, therefore, how the elements of the periodic table that we now understand in that time wasn't even yet fully formed, would actually, where they would fall based on how heavy they are and what they are on this spiral. And so the only reason I'm showing you this is not for the detail, but for everyone else to wrap our brain around the fact that the difference between one element and another is just where it is in these balance of fields, okay? And he's actually done the most complex diagram you could ever imagine that explains everything from positive to negative electricity to male and female to every single element in the periodic table. And he even found, because there were gaps, that there would be some additional elements. And since his death, they have now found those elements. So he was spot on with where they would be, just simply based on harmonics and rhythm and physical balance of interchange of forces. So it's really quite wonderful. Since then, people have taken his information and advanced it. Other people have taken it in different ways and said it's much easier for us to represent all the elements on the periodic table as spirals. Some have actually represented all the elements on the periodic table around this actual more four-dimensional, I say, more than three-dimensional donut torus. Some have done them in even more complex forms. But if you go back to Walter Russell, he just unpacks that spiral even further into, so you can imagine this is a circle, but he's just unfolded it. You can find each element on the periodic table like that. And a number of other people have related each element on the periodic table to different platonic solids. And I'll explain that in a moment. But really, this periodic table, which is so linear and straight and doesn't really make intuitive sense and is very logically set out, is confusing because it's just so simplistic in the way that it becomes complicated. Whereas this is so actually what's happening. They say if we actually reoriented the periodic table around the where they actually lie in the balance of these interchanging forces, you'd find the noble gases, which are non-reactive, would be in the center, and the more reactive would be further and further apart. And it's very similar to a tornado with a silent eye in the middle and the more force fields around it. And that's much easier for us to understand because it makes sense to us if we see the flow. So what Dan Winter has done is he said this particular flow form you could see as a spinning top or a gyroscope. And if you wanted to stack gyroscopes or different plasmas together that were overlaying, what's happening now? Yeah. You could only stack them in ways where the force fields were perfectly balanced. So if you have a gyroscope spinning here and you try to stack another one here, it would wobble it off center. So you always have to stack them in ways that are perfectly balanced. And therefore you can only stack them where the flat ends are against the size of the platonic solids. And the reason why this is so important is when we studied the elements in chemical engineering or in chemistry, you hear about the center, which is the protons and the neutrons, and that there are these shells where you can have numbers of electrons. But you can only have just so many in each shell. Now, if you use this as your method of understanding this, the only reason you could have so many electrons in each shell is the only reason you can stack spinning force fields together in a way that doesn't disturb each other or unsettle them is if they are stacked against the sides of balanced force fields, which is these platonic solids. So we talk about electrons having an S shell, a P shell, a D shell, and an F shell, which are S, P, D, and F. And you can only have 2 electrons, 6 electrons, 10 and 14 electrons in each of these shells. And nobody's ever said why, just that's the way it is. Whereas Dan Winter says it's because of these balance of forces, and therefore the only numbers you could ever get is these numbers because they perfectly match the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron's balance of forces. So you can actually start to see that this is just another emphasis of the fact that there is nothing actually physical. There's just these different force fields interacting, and the platonic solids are just a representation of vector equilibrium. In other words, it's perfect balance of forces. Okay, so different people have represented this information in a different way. The alchemists used to refer to all of these all the time, and how you could transmute fire to air and water just by understanding how you transmute each of these platonic solids to different to another one. So just by understanding forces. And Buckminster Fuller has done the same. There was a man called Dr. Moon, or someone, Professor Moon, who published in one of the scientific journals many years ago how each of these elements in the periodic table could be related to the platonic solids. And you can actually just see the dumbbell group, the tetrahedron group, the cube group, the octahedron group, and it's a much simpler way of actually understanding the periodic table. This is quite a fun one. You have the carbons, the hydrogens, the oxygens, the nitrogens, and they even wrote here the dodecahedron is plasma. So I thought that was quite fun. But it's also the noble gases. Okay, so when Dr. Rodrigo was referring to this periodic table of elements, he was referring to particularly the, if you look at, let me go back here. If you look at each one of these, he was referring to this number here of each one, okay? So you've got the atomic number. This is the first one. This is the second one on the table, the third one, fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one. So that is just what number it is on the table. But the number at the bottom is its atomic mass. It's how heavy it is, really. So if we were to say that everything is a plasma and everything is just the densification of fields, hydrogen is a very light element. So it hasn't really become dense. So its atomic mass is very low. It's like 1, right? It's just above 1. So it's only just starting to come from plasma into matter, right? And then you have helium, it's 4, so it's getting heavier. And then as you go along here, it gets heavier and heavier, right? So something like carbon is now getting heavy, but it's at the level of 12, okay? And then you have oxygen, even heavier, 16, okay? And as you get into the heavy metals, zinc and copper, which is what we work a lot with in making GANs, you can see they're very heavy. But just literally use your total net of common sense. Hydrogen is very light, copper is heavy, zinc is heavier, okay? So that heaviness has got to do with how much density they have or how much strength of fields that they have. So the strength of gravitational and magnetic fields is actually what really is how you can just interpret that atomic mass, okay? So if something has a strength of its field at like 64, it's a much heavier or much stronger field than something at 1. Okay, so if you're making GANs of copper, that field effect of the copper is going to have a much stronger effect than the field effect of something where you use carbon and hydrogen, which is the CH3, just because it's heavier. And if you have one of them compared to another one, this field is going to be stronger, this is going to be weaker, this is almost going to be like the earth, and this is like the human body, this is going to be more gravitational, it's going to pull inwards, and this is going to, you're going to have the interaction like that. So when he's referring to atomic mass, he's really referring to wrapping our brain around how strong their fields are and how dense these elements are, okay? And that then helps us understand when we're working with them how we can transmute them and how we can have them interact with each other. He specifically referred to mercury. Now you can see mercury's right next to gold on the periodic table. The only difference between this line, this line, this line, this line, and this line is the number of electrons they have in their shells. There's no such thing as shells. So it's the field effect of electrons. So you can actually imagine if you could externally affect the field effect of mercury, you could change that state just enough to transmute it to gold. And he says that you can do that in your brain, if you have mercury in your brain, by putting a CH3 patch on one side of your head and a CO2 patch on the other side of your head. That's the simplest version. There's obviously more complicated helmet versions as well. But really what you're doing is you're creating a difference between the CH3 and the CO2, and that difference in those two fields going across your brain would transmute the mercury to gold. I haven't really wrapped my brain around why exactly those ones would do it, but that's basically what he's talking about. So just so you get another understanding, this first line is everyone which has one electron in its shell, external shell. These have got 2 electrons in the external shell, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a full house, okay? So it's much more fun for me to say these are the decahedrons, these are the icosahedrons, the cubes, etc. It's just a way of expressing how full or how many complex layers of electrons you have, or how many sides of balancing forces you have, which make it more non-reactive or reactive, depending on where it is. Okay, and they generally refer to these as the alkali metals, and these as the noble gases. Noble gases meaning they're pretty much non-reactive. Now, I've already said if you put this in the center and all of these spiraling around it, you get a completely different picture. Okay, so almost imagine that this is like the caveman version of understanding plasma. And the spirally pictures are much more a representation of it. Okay, so each column, the only difference between these and these and these and these and these, as they get denser, they also change how many electrons they have, which also means they change what sort of shape they have in their balance of forces. So this is very, even though it's current, this very old-fashioned understanding of what an atom is extremely, it's like trying to physically identify each one of these things as a thing when they're not things, they're just interacting field effects. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how each one of these things is a different way of looking at it. Okay, so the platonic solids is how you connect each point and balance the forces. This flow form of a plasma is basically how things flow. And other people use more complex geometries, and that's just a way of looking at the field effects that are coming off. But all of it is the same information. It's just different perspectives of the same information. Okay. So in Keshe's world, they talk about there's just a plasma. It's all it is. And with which part you're looking at is the field effects that we call an electron, a proton, or a neutron. And it's all just the same thing. Okay. One of the questions Amanda had for me was, why does CO2 work with the emotions and the physical body? So I just wanted to talk about two things. Carbon is what most of our physical matter on this earth is made from. Okay, so where the earth is relative to the sun, how those fields interact, you get these elements forming, which we call elements, but it's just the field effect of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. But carbon is a very stable sort of, you can hold things in place. You can just think of a piece of wood as a piece of carbon, or a piece of lead or graphite. Graphite, basically carbon. It's very solid, it's very stable, okay? But when we burn carbon, we add oxygen to it and we pull it apart, right? So carbon dioxide is the pulling apart of carbon using oxygen. And we tend to do the pulling apart of carbon in our own bodies through our breath. And the way that we breathe is an indication of our emotions. So if we breathe, we're under stress, and if we breathe calmly, then we're in peace and calm. So you can imagine under stress, you burn your carbon differently than under peace, you burn your carbon in a different way. So the oxygen is got a relative atomic mass, and carbon's got a relative atomic mass, and their interaction in the physical is basically what, together with hydrogen and nitrogen, make up our physical world. So you just imagine that carbon and oxygen CO2 is related to breathing out, and that our emotions are connected to the way that we breathe out, but it's also related to pulling apart a physical matter. You can imagine that every one of your emotions is held into place in your physicality, and you can release those, and in releasing them, you can also release them through breath. So that's the way I understand it, in a sort of roundabout way, without necessarily saying exactly why CO2 interacts with the emotions. Does that help? Yeah. I think those are all your questions, Mandy. I don't know if I didn't get all of them, but if you have any others, let me know. If anyone else has any questions, or if anyone else has any other answers to those questions, please come forward. Oh, sorry, I have one other thing I wanted to show you. Sorry, this is the part that I wanted to show you. Okay, so we've got solid, liquid, gas. If you want to go from the physical towards plasma, you create a nano surface on the copper. If you want to go from the plasma towards the solids, you create a GANs. So in other words, you create a field effect in salt water using different elements. That field effect starts to turn plasma into the physical, which makes the GANs, okay? But if you have a physical and you want to get it towards the plasma, you create a surface, which is around about freeing the electrons, that is nano or monatomic, and that helps you get towards the plasma. So I kind of see the making of a nano-coated copper is like pulling matter towards the plasma, and the making of GANs is pulling plasma towards the physical. And by putting these two together, we enable plasma to interact with the physical, and therefore enabling chi or life force to heal, or enabling 0-point energy to come into the physical. This is a really cool way to think about it. Similarly, Walter Russell says from the one you have all matter forming. We have the teachings that we get at Ramtha School that everything comes through these 7 levels. And the one time he said before you have the 0-point energy, then you have, he called it an omni, but you could call it a plasma. He says at this level, the X-ray level, you have the neutron forming. At the UV level, you have the proton forming. And then as you swap over into the physical, which is sort of across into the visible light, infrared, you start having the electrons, which is the duality. So anything above visible light into the blue, where you now have the electrons free, is actually a plasma. So when I'm working with this, I think when I'm taking copper and I'm turning it into nano, I'm moving up this way. And when I'm taking plasma and turning it into a GANs, I'm moving this way. And I'm hoping the two start working together so I can bring this down into here. Does that help as well? This one really helps me understand it the most. That's because it's where I have my basis of information. But really, we're just trying to bring the plasma into the physical and bring the physical up to plasma. Rather like having wind all around us. Unless you build a windmill with a dynamo, you can't ever tap that. We have plasma all around us. Unless you build those connecting points, we can't ever tap it. Okay, I think that's it.
I just wanted to say that thanks, Claire. That was incredible. There's a lot still to integrate. It just absolutely blows my mind. But really nice to integrate some of the models that are vaguely in my brain with the new material, with the Keshe material. And I mean, there's so many questions. I just want to see if anyone else has got questions. I've got a lot of other questions, but I'll leave those until the end. Let's just hear from some other people.
I've got a question or 2 questions. Okay, Claire, yeah, the one question is on, I'm working with a swimming pool and I'm kind of hesitant to have too many bottles of copper oxide, GANs and plasma water, you know, in the containers floating around. So trying to determine, you know, how would I calculate how much copper oxide would be enough to affect the pool, you know, to prevent the algae. But I've also put in other things. I've put 3 others into the pool as well, floating around. That's the one question, and I can ask the other one after that.
I'm not exactly certain, so I'm just going to try and answer it for you. But I do know that when Dr. Rodrigo was talking about using copper in the body, he said, you know, very, very, very small amounts, and the field effect much more than the copper itself. So if you want to work on regenerating your eye, you put 1 drop on your eyelids, not more than that. And if you want to work with copper in your body, rather use the patches than that. So it's definitely cautious around that. In generally, what you're doing is you need to have I don't have that understanding, but if I'm adding chlorine to the pool, I have a size of my pool relative to, so I know how much percentage chlorine to put in that volume. I think we need to get that sort of number from someone. So I don't know what the copper oxide volume to.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it's like a field.
Yeah, I think what somebody would definitely use the field rather than pour copper in whatever. But secondly, somebody in her name's Jackie. She uses dowsing rods all the time to figure out how far fields are and how much to do stuff with, because this is kind of unknown. So I'll ask her if she's ever done a dowsing list of what quantities, but it's an unknown number for myself. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and then yeah, thank you. Then the other question is around dynamic reactors, as to yeah, if the reactor is spinning anti-clockwise, so then creating a gravitational field, in my mind, if I'm correct, would it be possible, say, if I have CH3 in there, that it could be pulling out iron from my body, or would CH3 not have that kind of effect? Could we, use the dynamic reactors to pull out certain things from our body?
I have to wrap my brain around a bit more, but whenever you have a plasma and then you spin it, it has different effects than if the plasma is not spun. So,
okay.
Water, and then you spin it, you can, have huge sort of suctions created versus just water, which is just being. So the impact of spin is going to change how it responds. But I would say Benjamin is I don't know if he's good with how it reacts to the body, but he's much better at understanding the dynamic reactor than myself. He is online, so he could possibly answer. But just in general, once you spin something, it behaves completely differently. Like air, once it's spun, creates tornadoes and cyclones versus air when it's still. So yeah, it has a different field effect, which means it's going to.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, so, yeah. No, Dr. Rodrigo is going to give a workshop on the reactors November, I think. So then we'll get an update. Yeah.
But Benjamin might have an answer. Is there? You can say if he does.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, no, I'll try him as well.
Does anyone else have questions? Or Benjamin, you want to try and answer that? Don't know if Benjamin's around or online.
Hello.
Hi, Benjamin.
Hear me? Am
Yes.
I coming through clear?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just listening to all that's being said. Can you hear me? Am I coming through? Okay. What I just wanted to say is, it's very exciting to listen to all the technical explanation that Claire's given. But one of the things I've realized over the years now of being involved in this technology and this process, I've realized that, and Keshe always said, I haven't come to teach, I've come to inspire. So he wants people to take whatever's coming and think about it, but be inspired to be creative. In other words, he also very clearly said, don't be the process of monkey see, monkey do. He said he could very easily give it to us like that there, and he can give you step by step to do exactly how to do everything, but he prefers for you to experiment and to play with the stuff. And one of the things I've learned over all of this is, now also coming from a very sort of scientific, technical background, which is very left brain, it's been quite interesting to kind of switch over more to right brain stuff. And I've seen over these years that Keshe is actually taking mankind on a journey, because, in other words, ultimately, we can do all this stuff just through our thoughts. What we can create, and we can do all that sort of stuff. But if you say that to people, they won't believe it. So what you've got to do is you've got to increase people's belief in these fields. I mean, myself, when I made little balls and I put different GANs waters into them, and I started moving them around, and I actually felt that it was like a magnetic field. I could feel that. It was like mind-blowing to me to see that. But what that did to me was it increased my belief in the understanding of those fields, because I felt them. So in all this stuff, one of the things that came through very clearly, in other words, in Tokyo, at the University of Tokyo, they came back, and from the scientific experiments, they came back and said that Gans water is absolutely non-toxic. So whatever Gans water you've got is not toxic to anybody at all. But you've got to be careful. Don't work, don't consume or work with the Gans itself. But the Gans water is okay. So I'm hearing what Willem is saying about the swimming pools, and I'm saying, you know, we know that heavy metals are bad for our bodies, but the Gans of these various metals and things is not. So I'd say, Willem might say, experiment. That's the way you're really going to find out, and that's how we're going to find out. And you can come back and tell us. But be careful of us getting to be too much in our heads than in our hearts and feeling what we're doing. It's great to listen, and I mean, Claire is amazing in what she comes across, and I think today she's put across the whole scientific way in an amazing way. There's no doubt about that. But let us not just get hooked up in that. Let's feel the stuff and work with it. That's all I wanted to share. I don't know if that means anything to anybody. I'm just going by what I've felt over the years of actually being with this. I also realized also from doing quite a lot of workshops that the stuff that we're talking about in many cases goes way above many people's understanding. And I also know that because of that, it's more important to get them to feel it. When I was talking to Kevin Blundell, and we were talking about doing workshops and things, and I know from Mr. Keshe, and that what they're saying is the intent is very, very important. So we get an intent again is coming back from what our thoughts and our feelings are. So that part is more important, and what he's doing is taking mankind from where they are in the very physicality more to the understanding that we are co-creators on this planet, and we actually do that through our thought process now. And anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough, but I just wanted to bring that across. Claire, I don't know your comments on that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that this, what I'm trying to show with the science, is how our science was so complicated that we made these periodic tables that confuse everybody. But just ignore that and realize that everything is just spinning, and unhook all of that thought that anything was ever physical and that everything is just a field effect. Even if scientists come to you and say absolute crap, you can say, no, trust me, science is now catching up, but this is absolutely true. That's really the reason for that. And the fact that we have to use dowsing rods to figure out volumes to use is because there is no, it is feeling. Dowsing is just a confirmation. It's like a feedback of feeling, because we don't actually know.
Yeah, if I can also just say, in terms of feeling, the swimming pool is just feeling amazing. It's just, we go in and feel energized, and it feels alive, and it just feels wonderful. And same with the dynamic reactor I use in my practice room. Normally there'd be stuck energy from, you know, work being done, and now the dynamic reactor is spinning there 24/7 with gold plasma and CO2 plasma, and I go in there and the energy feels clear. You know, it feels wonderful. It's always clearing out stuff. So, yeah, that's, in that sense, things are working.
And also that Keshe says the fields get taken in if they need it and not if they're not. You know, whatever you put in, it will find its own balance. You can't put too much that it'll overbalances when it comes to fields, I suppose.
Okay.
I just wanted to add to the conversation about the innovation around the dynamic reactors, because we are in a way all kind of finding our way with all of this technology. And what happened, the interesting thing was that we had the iron, or the CH3, in the dynamic reactor, and we were spinning it counterclockwise a lot. And Willem's iron count dropped radically, and we couldn't make a correlation. And I thought, well, maybe there's a chance that the iron spun in a counterclockwise rotation might be pulling the iron out of the body. So that it's kind of just for us all to know that we're these kind of grand explorers in these spinning fields now, and on the other hand, on the other side of some vortex is the rest of the iron, wherever it went. I don't know. But it's very the experience of having dynamic reactors and spinning fields in the house with experimenting with different elements is quite exciting, because they create really different fields. So we're enjoying that experiment a lot. Are there any other questions? Yeah, sorry, Claire.
The other thing that's important when it's health applications, so Benjamin and I have had Blundell to be qualified as workshop teachers, and they just say that if you're not a qualified health practitioner or medical doctor, you cannot teach or give workshops on the health space. So in effect, I'm not qualified in the health space because I actually don't understand how the human body works. That's really versus a health practitioner who would understand it better. So I think Benjamin's getting qualified at level 3 because it's making the magrabs, and I'm qualified at level 2, which is just practically understanding the science and how to make ganses. In order to be qualified at teaching the health space, you have to be a qualified health practitioner.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else?
Is it possible for me to maybe bring up, just kind of open discussion around a few things? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, talking about your experiences with the reactors, it's very exciting, but in my mind, what is happening is if you've got the magnetic and gravitational fields that would usually be operational in a water that's still, now what you're doing is you're taking those two different aspects and you're forcing them to move in the same direction, which is essentially taking where that membranous space in the middle, or the point 0 is, and you're basically forcing them both in the same direction, which is creating an imbalance between the torsion fields. So you're literally creating a super powerful one going in one direction, which is literally like a wormhole, which is how you were describing it, which is literally, it makes sense in that way. And then, if possible, I just wanted to open up, please, Claire, when you were talking about creating plasma and the different ways using the temperature, pressure, and then creating an environment with the magnetic and gravitational fields, and thereby creating a space where the plasma can form naturally. Looking at the GANs making process using a circuit and the anode and the cathode, it's essentially creating a flow between one side and another. And kind of what I'm wanting to see, if anyone has any input here, is the moving of electrons from one thing to another. Could possibly the reversal of that circuit also play a part in doing that? I've recently been experiencing some very interesting things with the GANs that I'm making with silica dioxide, and there's some very interesting things happening, but also in other places. I hadn't experienced it before, but I've heard of others experiencing it, where it's almost as if the bubbles are coming off of the zinc instead of the carbon, but it's not related, it doesn't seem to relate to the way that the circuit is set up. That, and if it's related to in any way to these other things, I'm kind of bringing in a whole lot of different ideas, but is anyone that has some input with that? No?
I'll say that just by putting a nanocoated copper relative in a field effect in salt water relative to another piece of metal generates the field effect, and just by putting a piece of copper wire between them, just connect both fields, that's what I mean by changing the field. When you put electric current across it, that's going to affect it on another level. So that's a different layer to it. But I generally make the best GANs without any electric current across it. And then I have not done anything with the other ones other than the basic GANs and the GANs, so I haven't seen it. I think what you could do is video it and show it to lots of people and everybody comment.
Okay, thank you so much. Broke up a little bit there, but did anyone else experience that where the bubbles are coming with the zinc? Okay.
Yeah, no, not that I can remember, Jules. I mean, there's been plenty of things that have happened. I'm sure I've done reverse GANs making, and I think it made a terrible smell in the house. But, I'm sure we'll stumble on all sorts of interesting things as we experiment. So you must just document what happens. Are there any other questions?
I wanted to ask one.
Yes.
There's been this discussion or quite a bit of agitation on the group The Golden Age of GANs about apparently, and I think it's 176 Knowledge Seekers Workshop. I haven't actually watched it myself, but there's been some quite hectic stuff on the Golden Age of GANs group saying that using carbon rod is not as effective as using nano-coated metals. I just wondered, and I mean, from seeing the GANs at Benjamin's and Claire's, I just wondered what their input was and if Benjamin or Claire had heard about this. But it got a lot of people very angry because they were saying that basically using carbon rod is redundant and it's all this horrible stuff.
I can answer it. Kevin Blunder, when he interviewed us, said we're no longer allowed to teach the carbon method because it's not approved by Dr. Keshe. And the very basics of it is if you take copper and nanocoat it, it's got a specific atomic mass. And you put that relative to zinc, the difference in atomic masses is what actually creates the field effect to bring in the GANs that we want. Some people liken the nano coating on copper to be like graphene or a nano material that's got a very specific structure to it, and therefore carbon or graphene would have a similar effect. But in terms of taking the monkey see, monkey do, Dr. Keshe definitely says it's the atomic mass of copper nano-coated versus the atomic mass of zinc that makes the GANs that he wants us to make. And if you use carbon and you use zinc, it's a different type of GANs, more matter-based, so closer to the matter and less to the plasma. Benjamin and I both agree that the GANs that we have made with carbon definitely has an effect, and it's good and it's cool. I've since only been making the one with the nano-coated copper just because of that information, and I thought it would be silly for me to ignore it. But both Benjamin and I do agree that the existing GANs we've made is very effective. So that's why there's a discussion. Apparently one individual sent out the carbon method and he was generally well appreciated, and Kerry taught it, and Whitney taught it, and we all learned it, and we have since taught it, and it works well to make GANs, and it helps everyone to quickly make GANs. But it's if you really want to follow the deeper understanding, that's why they say we should use the copper.
Okay, that's cleared that up.
If you want to be an official Keshe workshop teacher, you can only teach the copper method from now on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I've got a question about, there's a couple of questions, but the one is the recent upgraded method of making food GANs that I've heard is no longer using kind of caustic soda agent or anything like that. It's just blending the food and adding CO2. Is that right?
I can come in a bit. I was chatting to Lisa McDonald a couple of days ago, about a week ago. Before we got involved with these workshops, and that, and she came up and told me that about that. There, she was saying basically what you can do is for the foods, if you've got the powder, you can actually then just mix it in with your CO2 GANs. And it then picks up the fields that way. But if you're talking about sort of plant material or something like that, you need to dry it first. So she spoke about flash drying it in a pan so that you can get it dry, and then you have to crush it up into a powder form and use it that way. I've started looking at that there, but I don't know. It feels kind of right, but yeah. And it feels better than actually using the caustic soda. So I don't know what your feelings about that, Claire.
Oh, you need to unmute.
It was unmuted. Why?
I just unmuted.
I think what I've done with the homeopathic medicines, it's like little sugar crystals or drops, so that it's almost like pointless to put that through HCl, and I've always just put that in the CO2 GANs and then never bought the homeopathics again because it seems to work. But I guess you could do that in water and it would still work. Then I've used like things when are wet, like fresh from the garden, they just get rotten if you don't really do something to them first, and often the HCl or sodium hydroxide does something. I've also heard Rodrigo say you could just cook it on the, until it burns, and you can do the same thing. So it's like doing something to it so that it doesn't rot it doesn't just ferment, I guess. Yeah, that's why I suppose they dry it. So from my perspective, I don't have a flash dryer. I don't want to cook it, and actually just adding a bit of sodium hydroxide or acid actually is quite simple. But for some things like vitamins and stuff that's already in a form that won't go rotten, I'd say it's pretty fine just to add the CO2. That's based on what is coming through from various people.
Yeah, if I can come in, I tried that method with all my supplements and it was going well. And then I started adding superfoods, which were dried. But then, it started looking like stuff were growing in there, and it was, things floating around. So this morning I threw the whole lot out. Although it was still tasting fine, but then I felt, no, I'm not happy with it. So I'll start again and just do the supplements, leave the superfoods around. I'll work with the superfoods on their own and see what comes out.
I had another question, it might not be the right forum for it, or maybe it's another workshop, but just when I hear the Keshe Institute talk about the soul, the whole thing about the soul as almost like as the lawgiver of everything, from the soul unfolds the body, that kind of thing. It's kind of in line with what I've learned, except that I've sort of understood the soul to not be in the middle of the brain. So that's a different, interesting piece that they've added. I don't know where they got it from. I don't know if I've never heard of the soul in the center of brain. So for me, from what I learned from Ramtha, is that there's a 0 point energy, which is before the soul. The soul is the recorder of experience. And that, you know, as you, before you come into this life, you kind of set a frequency imprint or a code or a resonant field or whatever for the life you're coming in with. So then that's printed into the soul. And then that comes into the body, that code comes into the body. So that would inform the fields, you could say. But I just wonder if that dot in the middle of the brain that they're referring to as the soul is not more like the God self or the God spot or the, you know, the 0 point energy before the soul. I just wondered if there's any thoughts or anyone wants to say anything about that.
I definitely say I love comparing the different models and seeing where the commonalities are and where the differences are, because that gives it much greater richness. It's like looking at something from so many different perspectives that by looking at it this point and this point, you kind of fill in the gap automatically. Whereas if you only look one way, it's just the way it is. I don't know the answer to that, but I do think it's quite important to enrich it with other perspectives.
Anyone else want to say anything? No, I also agree. I like the different perspectives. It's interesting.
I just like to sort of just a little comment on this. You know, we're talking about everything is all just fields anyway. But as beings in the physicality, we like to put things somewhere. And perhaps that's just what they've done, is they've kind of said, well, let's put it over there. I don't think it's there, or where it is. So we are just managers of energy, and as energy is fields. And it's probably everywhere. So I don't know. So, but some people feel a lot more comfortable to know that it's somewhere specific. I don't think. You know, just another thought as well. Looking back over the years with Keshe, you know, what you've found is, first of all, it was very complicated. With I mean, even like with the power unit, and in which you had those 3 stack of magraves with lots of copper and whatnot, and eventually things became simpler. If you look at the medical the first unit, they had all those magraves within the unit. And then eventually it was just rings with CO2 and zinc oxide in. But ultimately we're going to get to the stage where it's nothing, because we've understood the full power of our thoughts. But we're getting there. You can see the journey, it's moving in that direction. So that's just my thoughts.
Building the magrav was like going through a labyrinth in your brain. You unhook all the thoughts that you had, and then building the star unit is the next labyrinth, and then we'll just use our hands. I'm sure it's like, because we've made everything so complicated, we had to unwind ourselves out of it. So that's how I see it.
I had a conversation a little while ago with William Brown, who's busy making a plasma device with the Resonance Institute, and it might be interesting to have him in a conversation sometime in a forum like this. So, because I sort of thought I was really clear about the fact that GANS is in the 4th state, and I was correlating it to a non-dual field. I was thinking, okay, well, this is, you know, the beginning of an unpolarized field, plasma. And he said no, it's very polarized. So I don't know if there's anyone wants to say anything about that. Maybe it's just 2 different models. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm halfway through melding the resonance foundation understanding of vector equilibrium and how spin forms matter, and that to see if there's a space in between. But it's interesting, anything where you measure a pull in and a push out has to have in some way some polarity to it. So it depends on your definition. But monatomics in general are considered non-polarized, and they refer to nanolayers and GANs as monatomic. I've heard them just reference it in their lectures. I'm in the Keshe Foundation. Again, that's again nouns versus verbs, the action of what something does. Because somebody might call something nano, somebody else might call something dual, something else might, polarized, and somebody else calls it not. So I think it's a lot of the time it's just terminology, but in general, it's I find if something works to clear your emotions, it's working at a level that it's least, even if it's like, hypnotic state, it's less polarized than the intensity of the polarization.
Yeah. I like the description about the CO2 GANs. It reminded me of alchemy, that in the blackening phase is a burning off and a kind of death of the thing that's happening. So I kind of correlated what you were saying about the CO2 GANs and breathing out with the alchemy phase, or they call the blackening, the first the calcification process. So it seemed to that there'd be like a death or a clearing or an ending of that particular emotional charge or limitation.
And also that you use ash to make, sodium hydroxide or lye, and the death of the tree that allowed that new life to come into being. So it's very
Yeah. Anyone got any other thoughts that they've had? I don't know what the time is. Just have a look.
Ma'am, it seems as if Tina's trying to say something, but her
okay.
Her voice is not coming through, so she's typed something.
Okay, I'll unmute her. Okay, Tina.
Hello.
You're on.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yes, you're
Hello.
on. You're on,
Tina,
Tina. You're on.
Okay. What I've also seen is I always had what you call healing hands. You can feel that there's an healing happening, and that has increased tremendously. I'm basically now an energy walking cloud. Hello? Hello?
We can hear you. We're just listening.
Yeah, so that has been very interesting because I'm basically in a constant field state of like pins and needles, energy, cloud, and I'm actually healing myself a lot now, even unintentionally, because it seems to have taken a life of its own.
That's wonderful. So do you relate that to the plasma work in some way?
Well, perhaps, because that's also fields, and healing is fields. And like Benjamin said, intention, fields, thoughts, whatever. But now I can actually not even think, and I can feel that energy that I normally have to think about to bring it on in your hands. I can now bring it on in my whole body. And when I now deal with people, just remember, I'm not healing. I'm just a channel of it, of that energy. But the reactions and what is happening on the table is quite interesting.
Wonderful.
So I would challenge you all to start playing with that. Start feeling it in your hands and in your feet, and then in your knees, and then in your elbows, and bring it into your whole body. And actually, when you are now then with people, they start to feel me without me having to switch it on.
Wonderful, yeah.
That's what I wanted to share.
That's Great. Yeah, we've got all this technology inside of us. We are it as well.
Yeah.
Anybody else would like to say anything? All right. Well, should we bring the meeting to a close? I just wanted to thank everybody. Thanks, Claire, for making time for us, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and your insight. It helped me a lot, and I've recorded this. I'll upload it, and if everyone's okay, we can share it with our groups for anyone else that might learn from it. Is that okay, Claire? Anyway, I'll find out from her. And we looking at another Zoom short workshop with Dr. Rodrigo to discuss the new dynamic reactor beds and the development of the work. I do have a date for it. I'll just let you know. I can't remember the date offhand, but I'll let you all know when that's coming. That could be quite fun too. So thanks everybody. Thanks. Nice. Does anyone want to say anything before we close? Any news or anything left? No.
No, just same. Yeah. Really, thanks so much to Claire with all the work and putting the presentation together. It's really great. It really deepens my understanding. It's like, and there's new angles to things, and she's bringing. Claire, thanks for bringing it from various perspectives. So yeah, that really helps. So thanks so much.
Yeah, it helped me as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Claire. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Amanda, thank you so much for organizing this.
Yeah, pleasure.
Appreciated. We're all to connect and talk a bit about it.
It's nice to be together.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.